Okay. All right. First of all, for everybody, I want you to be able to tell us your name and tell us your film and what you did on your film.
Okay, my name's Sophie Black, and my film is Growing Shadows, the Poison Ivy fan film. I was the director of the film, and also because of budgetary reasons, I was the costume designer on the film as well.
Okay. All right. So this gets asked a lot of questions. This gets asked to me a lot. Is why did you decide to do a fan film as opposed to something else, something more original to you?
Okay, well, I mean, my team and I, we've made many original films now. I've always been a fan of Poison Ivy, though, since I was a kid. I used to dress up as her. I'd watched Batman, the animated series in the 90s, and I loved her in it. And I got very close to an actor called Ashlyn Diaf, and we became friends. And we discovered a mutual love of Poison Ivy and a frustration that she hadn't really been committed to cinema. She's only appeared in one film, and that was Batman and Robin in the 90s, played by Uma Thurman, which was universally panned. And I found her portrayal very disappointing. I found a lot of that film disappointing. And we were getting really frustrated that she hadn't been given the cinematic treatment that she deserves as a great character yet. So we were like, you know what, we're filmmakers, we've got contacts now. Shall we just make the Poison Ivy film that we want to see, that we can make at this stage in our careers? And so we got sick of waiting for the big studios, so we thought, let's make our own. And I don't know if I would have done a fan film if it weren't for the frustration as a fan of not having the film I wanted in cinemas. It's what pushed us both to do it.
So I'm gonna add a little bit of something to that as well, only because I was never a big fan of Poison Ivy, probably because of the movie. And yep. I watched a whole bunch of the animated show. I read a lot of comics when I was younger, so that's what my background is with Poison Ivy. But what I have to say about your film is because I screened it for our other film festival, Something Wicked Film Festival. Loved it. And I had to have it for this one because this one's catered towards fan films. I have to admit, that you two did something phenomenal with a character that I kind of threw away there.
Thank you.
And this goes to her performance, and not just her performance, but the directing, because the cinematography is amazing, and you did with a superhero fan film what I'm not used to seeing, which is a film. I don't know if this is correct in describing it, but I like to call it almost like a little gothic romance as opposed to a superhero movie, because it's really a story between Bruce Wayne, not Batman, Bruce Wayne and Poison Ivy, which I really liked.
Thank you. Well, a lot of the best Poison Ivy comics from back in the day were all about a relationship that she had with Batman. It was very much a common thread for a long time with her character, is they always had this kind of sexual tension. And what I love about Batman and DC Comics in general is when they're done tonally right, they are like film noir. The animated series that got me into Batman and got me into Poison Ivy, it's very much film noir. It's very classical, and it's dark, but not in like a gritty kind of way. It's classy, and it's beautiful, and it's like a crime drama with elements of fantasy thrown in, and that's the tone that I love and everyone involved in the film loved. And you mentioned the cinematography, so I have to give a shout out to Will Price, director of photography, because he is amazing. And we did look at like Batman films. We looked at Nolan, of course, but we mostly just looked at film noir. The night before the shoot, we all got together, the actors and the crew, and we watched Gilda, the 1940s Rita Hayworth gangster film, and we looked at the shadows, and the performances are so wooden and so hammy in that. Apart from Rita Hayworth, she's amazing, but it was just so slick and cool, and just gangsters and femme fatales, and that's very much the feeling we were going for, because a lot of Batman homages that when it's done well.
Yeah, and well, that just brings up a good observation that you decided to go with the noir look, and that's something I don't see often enough in a lot of the short films. And especially in fan films, where I think the easier way out is to do something that looks almost like a comic book. I was going somewhere with it and I forgot. But was it difficult to shoot the film, it being in a limited amount of locations?
Yes, definitely. It was very hard to find Gotham on when you've got a limited budget. And we were doing Arkham Asylum because that's our favorite place in the DC world. And I personally love the asylum setting and all the opportunities for drama that gives us. So we definitely said straight away we wanna set the film in Arkham Asylum. And that's not cheap to do. So finding somewhere on a budget was difficult, but had the right kind of that sort of realism versus film noir kind of feel that we were going, like believable noir that we were going for. Finding that on the cheap was very hard. Also, we're in the UK, and Gotham is very much an American city, so finding somewhere that was believably American, it was really, really hard. And we ended up filming underground in London. We were in a disused tube station, so it was very old-fashioned, very creepy, there was a lot of moisture and damp in the air because we were underground Waterloo Station. Really, yeah, underground in London, which hasn't changed in hundreds of years. So it gave that kind of that historical feel, but it gave that creepy feel that the asylum needed. But yeah, the conditions were very damp, very moist, which played with havoc with the camera a little bit. And there was like a lot of mist in the air that wasn't our smoke machines, that was the damp. Some of it was our smoke machines, some of it was damp. And we also had a limited time in the location before we had to be chucked out, and it got turned into a very cool nightclub. So we were very time pressured. But the biggest thing was the fact that overhead, the tube was still running. Waterloo tubes were still running above us. So about every 45 minutes, we'd hear a tube go over, a train go above us, and it would rattle the whole place. And I remember at one point, Robert Dukes, who plays Bruce Wayne, had a moment where he just got a line perfect and the train just went ahead and interrupted him, and he was like, ah! So we had to like cut and wait for the train. But it actually, there was one point where Ashlyn Diaz Ivy had to react out of fear to the scenario. And that was the exact point that a train went over and made her jump. And it just added to that moment so well. So there were times when it added something, but it created a lot of tension, which we tried to use in the performances.
So I probably played havoc with your sound person on set.
Yeah, he was pretty cool about it. He was like, there was trains in that one, just so you know. I mean, it had like a different rattly sound, so it was quite cool. But the moisture played havoc with our throats. The next day, no one had any voice, so it was an interesting. It was beautiful on screen, that environment, but it was a challenge as well.
So, how long did you shoot in that location? Since you say you didn't have a lot of time.
No, 2 days. 2 days, and very much out at 5 p.m. sharp. So there was a lot to get, and the set was constructed, taken down, repainted, and rebuilt during that time. So kudos to production designer Charlotte Ball and her assistant Inma Cook, because we could only afford one set. So she had to just make it look completely different for the two different sets that Ivy has in the film. So she had to disassemble it, spray paint it white, bring it in, still smelling all the paint fumes. And it was a real feat for her doing that. Yeah, so it was very time pressured, but, kudos to everyone involved.
Well, it pays off, because the difference between the first set and the second set, when you watch Ivy walk into her new cell, they're completely different. So
it's the same set, it's just rebuilt to look bigger. It was repainted, it was moved to a different part of the room, it was lit differently. We only had one room plus the outside corridor, but making it look like two different rooms, all down to lighting and set and performance and the way the guys reacted to the space they were in. But lighting was key in making those two rooms look different, even though it was the same room.
I know people who will be listening to this will be saying, you shot that in 2 days and you got kicked out. So like, wow. Because sets are impressive.
Thank you.
It's good to know that the natural habitat with all the moisture in the air adds to the film, because it does. It makes it seem like you're in a deep, dark dungeon she's been put in. I thought you put a whole bunch of haze in there to get to make it look
There
that
was some haze. There was some haze, and then some of it was just moisture. Yeah, there were rats. There were the odd rat around because it's basically Victorian London preserved that we were filming in. So yeah,
Oh wow.
definitely rats.
So I'm gonna backtrack a little bit. How did you get into filmmaking?
I I got my first camcorder when I was 15 in the early noughties, and it was a Hi8 tape camcorder, and I've just been hooked ever since. I mean, Lord of the Rings was the film that made me want to be a filmmaker when I was, when I first saw it 20 years ago next month, since the Fellowship of the Ring came out, and that was the film that changed my life. But I'm a small town girl. It was the early noughties. No one taught film near me back then. There was nowhere teaching it, so I didn't really pursue it until I went to film school when I was 18, but there was a big gap in between being obsessed with film and actually having the capacity to learn. It's very different today. Everyone can make films on their phone, and they can watch YouTube, and they don't need to travel to go to film school. I ended up traveling quite a way to go to film school. So I kind of started a little late. I started at 18, and by that point I was, behind all my peers. So I loved film, but it took me a while to be able to do it. But yeah, I pursued theatre for a while instead. I don't know why. I thought that was more achievable. But yeah, it was the fantasy films of the 80s I was raised on, that my dad used to play all the time, like Willow and Dragon Slayer and all that stuff, Hawk the Slayer. I was just raised on those. So that's what got me into film. And then, yeah, I went to film school and then started making little films myself that were very invariable quality, and have kind of built my way up since then over the last nearly 20 years now, actually, quite a while. I've been making films. So, yeah.
And have you always done shorts, or have you done some features, or you have a mixture of them?
Oh, I would love to make a feature. I made a really bad feature film in my teens when I was experimenting before I went to film school, when I was experimenting with my handheld camcorder, my mates playing everyone, even playing, adults, even though we were all teenagers, just putting suits on. And but I would love to do a feature now. It's so hard to get features off the ground. I've been nearly greenlit a few times over the last 10 years, but I keep trying. But I've worked on features. My background is actually in production and costume design. That's my first jobs after film school were in production and costume design, and I've worked on features that way, and I've worked in television that way. But myself as a director and running a production company, so far we've only made shorts, but we've made a few. I've directed 8, and through the company produced a further 3, and they've all done pretty well, and we're all really proud of them. So yeah, dying to make a feature, but in the meantime, just honing the skills as best we can, making magical fantasy and magical realist shorts that are shown all around the world. So we've been busy during that time.
So have you done any other fan films, or is this the only one you've done so far?
This is my first fan film. I would love to do another Poison Ivy film, just because it was such a joy and my cast was so perfect. And we felt really cheated after those 2 days, because usually shorts last about 5 days. So when those, we hadn't been together long enough to hate each other yet. We were all still in that like little happy creative flow. There'd been like no arguments, no tension. It was just suddenly over. And so we felt really cheated. We just wanted to keep going. So I'd love to do another Ivy fan film. And now I've done one. You always say, no, I'm going to make original films, but you make one fan film and you really get the bug. And if someone does a film that you don't like and you think you can do better, it is so tempting to go and try again. I'd love to do a Tolkien fan film as well. There's a scene, they couldn't fit everything in Fellowship of the Ring. That book is massive. And there is a scene in the Fellowship of the Ring, I don't know if you're aware of it, called the Barrow Downs, where there's a Barrow Wight who is this sort of ghoulish creature that kidnaps the hobbits and has them underground and locks them up, and he's like a ghoul, and Tom Bombadil has to come and save them. It's a really gothic, terrifying scene that they didn't shoot because they didn't have time. It's one of the best villains. I would love to make that as a fan film. That's probably the only other one. I want to make more Poison Ivy, and I'd make that in a heartbeat because I missed it from the main film. But Yeah, I think that's it for the fan films. But you get addicted, don't you, once you make one?
I've talked with several people who make fan films, and some of them are addicted. And I happen to be someone who has actually worked on like 5 of them myself from other filmmakers. That's where I got the joy of wanting to do the film festival based on fan films, is having done 5 of them myself. I've never directed one yet. I wrote one. That was as far as I got, and then I was on set for 5 other ones. So I see the draw, and the you get to see, well, like you said, you see something that you didn't like, and you want to improve upon it yourself. I think that's the number one reason why the filmmakers I work with decide to do fan films, is to improve upon them themselves. So
yeah, it happens with comic book movies in particular. Comic book movies, they're so subjective. Some people like the lighter side, some people like the darker side, and it's so hard to get the tone right with the films that have been made so far, particularly with the DC films. Though I get it that the fans think they know better, because they are the audience. If they're not happy and they've got a camera and they can make films, I really get it. I get why they want to have a go themselves and correct those wrongs. And yeah, Poison Ivy was a perfect example of a villain who had not been done justice. So yes, absolutely, I can see the appeal.
All right. So how was it working with your 2 main actors in this film? I know you've mentioned a little bit about your lead actress, Aslan. Is that how you pronounce? I always so I wasn't exactly sure how to say it the first time the other film festival, so I was trying to make sure I said it right this time. Okay.
Yeah, no, it was incredible. I had worked with Ashlyn before on a little short film that we made for a competition called The Dress, and she was incredible, and we just hit it off straight away. And then she introduced me to Robert Jukes, is actually her partner. He's now her husband. So, but yeah, and they're both acting, and they met through acting, and so they had that very easy, already had a chemistry because they were actually in love with each other. And like I said, they got married very shortly after we finished filming, like about 2 months later. So yeah, they had that natural chemistry. But they were wonderful to work with. They came on as actor producers. They were both producing the film. Ashton also wrote the script. We workshopped it together as a director and actors and writer. We workshopped it a lot over the months on the lead up to the shoot. We tried improvising scenes. We tried going back to the original source. We'd researched. That was the most fun part, was researching all the comic books. That was amazing. We read so many, and then bringing them back and putting in Easter eggs that we knew the fans would enjoy, and just trying to get the best version of Poison Ivy that we could, that the people wanted to see. It was just so much making the film for us, but making it for the fans as well. And Ash and Rob are both massive DC nerds, so they knew loads already, but we just researched more. It was an absolute joy. We were like 3 little musketeers together, as they were producing, like I said, I was directing, and they were so hands-on. I mean, in terms of performances, Ashlyn has been, she was born to play Poison Ivy. She's been dying to play Poison Ivy since she was a little girl. So it was one of those moments when she was like, I've arrived, I'm here, I'm in the part I'm meant to be in. So she needed so little. You just literally put her in a costume and put her on set, and she was there, and she was in character, and she was quite intimidating in character, because she knew exactly what she was doing, and it was really exciting to see her do this role that she wouldn't probably get the chance to do, because it would have to go to a famous actor, in a studio production, and she got the chance to do it. And Rob was amazing as an actor, because he was very intense on the research side. We'd talk a lot about the vulnerability of Bruce in the scenario versus the masculinity and the expectations of masculinity that Batman is under, and how important that is to portray that for men as well, and the idea that he would be putting himself in a vulnerable situation where he's breathing in Poison Ivy's pheromones. And we researched drug addiction and what it's like being intoxicated with those kind of, what that would feel like. So we were very much, we researched loads of scientific and criminal kind of documents to know what his character would be going through, which was just a joy to be doing that. But then as producers, they were so hands-on. Although they were acting, as soon as Rob had done with his scene, he was like, right, I'm going to help paint that set. I'm going to help move that set. And he was just so hands-on. And they were both making sure everyone was fed and looked after. And we all stayed in their house, in their flat. And, it was just a lovely little family team, and everyone looked after each other so well. It was, yeah, they were really great to work with.
So I want to bring up something in regards to the makeup for Poison Ivy, because it's subtle for that first half, and then you see her. I think it's the scene where she walks out into the light, and all of a sudden, oh wait, she's got this really subtle green to her. You didn't make it overly green like the Hulk would be, but it's so subtle, it's almost non-existent, but it adds to her character a little bit. Who was the makeup artist, and how did that come about? Your choices for that?
The makeup artist was Monica Montalvo, and she had to come in very last minute, bless her, and she was absolutely lovely to work with. But then we actually, and people don't know this, and I'm really glad that people don't know this, because Poison Ivy's makeup was mostly CG. We painted it on in post.
Wow, I did not know that.
No, if you look at the behind the scenes photos, she's skin colored. So, it was very much, we were getting it together in post, and we wanted it to be as grounded as possible, which is why we originally tried to do everything practically and makeup based. And then it just needed a little something else to make her slightly more magical. We'd already worked about making her slightly reflective and having green tinges to her contour. So where you'd usually contour on a face or add definition like eyeshadow and that kind of thing, with elements of green there, for example. So it was very subtle, and making sure she was very luminous, like kind of way the plants is like shiny, all that stuff. But then when we got it into post, we're like, we need to push this a little bit more, just to make her slightly more creepy at times and slightly more magical. And so it was enhanced. It was Will Price, the DOP, was also our colorist. He was the color grader on the film. And he very subtly added extra elements of green through some very complicated masking. He masked every single shot of her, every single one of her fingers, every head turn, everything was done in post and made her slightly greener. But then, yes, when she steps into the light and she has sunlight on her, she becomes a brighter green, because the idea is that she's like a wilting plant. Like, she has now become more plant than human in many ways. So when she's in the dark and she's starving, she's like the dying plant she's holding. She's fading and she's lost her coloration. And then when she gets the sunlight and she's happy, she is blooming. And that is why the green enhances at that moment. So yes, it's very much a continuation of her becoming healthier by being exposed to sun, which now post-lockdown seems very poignant. But it didn't at the time.
Well, that added a tremendous effect to the film, I have to say. I'm sorry I didn't catch that as a CGI moment there. I'm like, wow, they did a phenomenal job on this makeup. I could see it just suddenly in the dark, and when she steps out the light, you picked the word luminous is the perfect word for it. That's the perfect word for it. I was like, wow, that's great. I was like, I had to take note of that.
It's the lighting and the performance from Ashley at that point, and the music added to it. I mean, the makeup, obviously, Monica did a great job, but then, it was, I'm really glad that no one knows it's CG, because that's when CG is done right, is when no one notices it. So, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Speak to me about some of working with your cinematographer for this film. Since I've already mentioned how much I like the cinematography, your DP. Mention a little bit of how working with that person was, and remind me of the name of the person as well.
Will Price, who was the cinematographer, and also, like I said, he was the colorist, so he was responsible for all the tracking of the green skin. That was all him. He's a master, and he's just lovely. As I said, we looked at how films had been done before, because a huge thing with this was managing audience expectations and making a film that the comic readers would like, but also thinking about which DC films had gone down well with audiences. So what were the modern audiences expecting and wanting from the ultimate Poison Ivy fan film, essentially? So that's why we did look at Nolan, because a lot of people really liked the work of Nolan. So we did look at some of his cinematography as well, and some of the Tim Burton as well, some of the ones that had gone down really well, and the lighting in those, and just finding all that stuff that we knew the fans would love, but that we also felt would tell the story well. So looking at Batman done well, working that into our cinematography, but also very much, as I mentioned before, looking at film noir and capturing the classic crime feel of all the best Batman. And we're looking at a lot of Batman, the animated series, and film noir, and that feeling of, one of the great things about film noir is it uses a lot of slattered lights, like shooting through blinds and creating like strips of light. And that's very perfect when you're making a film about someone who's locked and caged and imprisoned. The idea of slats of light, it just works so well in a prison setting. And as I mentioned, this is a character who responds to light and is happiest in light. So it was making it look so like minimal in terms of light sources. It was not a place where she could thrive. It was not a place where she could grow plants. So his cinematography was very much inspired by the character's emotions at that point, and how restrictive and damp it would feel. And then also Will told me that the location itself and how damp that was also fed into the way he lit it, and kind of enhancing that feeling. And he wanted the audience to feel like how the location felt to us and enhancing that. So yeah, it was great. Will's amazing. I've worked with him a few times, and he's just really humble, really lovely, like really, really talented, and is confident with it, but at the same time he's just so chilled on set. Yeah, he was just lovely, and he found the atmosphere on this one really nice as well. So yeah, he's a really talented guy. He just paints it light. So
nice. So I hate to say this, what are you working on now, other than I know you want to work on eventually another Poison Ivy fan film, and maybe a Lord of the Rings little short film. What are you working on now?
I mean, if I had the opportunity to do those fan films, then if the money was there, then absolutely would do those. At the moment, I'm going to be one of those really annoying people, because I'm about to do a drama film, and it's got quite a big investor, and I cannot say who that is.
That's fine.
I unfortunately have to be one of those really annoying people. Like, I've got something great coming soon, but I can't tell you anything about it. I'm really sorry. So, and that's shooting early next year. Acting so much during lockdown, it's just been like a mental and creative shriveling up. I mean, my clients have been amazing. I've been making videos for clients for the last 2 years, and they've been fantastic, because most of my clients are artists, so that's been a joy. But actually being back on set, directing my little film family and making narrative work again, I'm itching to do that. Can't wait. I've also just produced a film called Good Grief, which is in post-production now, starring Vicky McClure from This Is England, and that's it's a drama film, but it's got this magical spin on it, because it basically visualizes grief and brings together these 4 women who've experienced child loss in very, very different ways, but they are connected by their grief, and their grief is visualized as this sort of glowing presence in their life that they cannot shift. And so that's a really powerful film. It's by a brand new director called Rob Sharp, and he's just been a joy to work with. And I'm slightly more experienced, and I've been guiding him through, along with co-producer Charlie Clark. And it's been so rewarding helping this new filmmaker tell this really bold and really moving story. So that's been a joy. So that should be coming out next year as well. Nice. And Ashton Diaf and Robert Jukes, as I said, the producers of Growing Shadows and the actors in Growing Shadows, they've just completed a film that's out now called Leia, which is a feature film, and that's doing really well, and that's a horror film, so people should go see that. I haven't seen it personally yet. I will. I've been busy. I'm sorry, Ash and Rob. I will see it soon, but it is just getting rave reviews, and it's just doing really, really well, and I think audiences are loving that. So if you want to see more Ashton and Rob, go see that. It's awesome, I'm sure. So that's out now, so that's definitely worth checking out.
Okay. So any final words for our audience in regards to your film, or anything else in that regards?
Well, this is our last festival film for the film, because it's been out a while now, and it's been you know, everyone says this. It's been such a journey during COVID, but it really has. The fact that we couldn't share it with people. We entered our festival run and then it stopped dead for 2 years, and now it's coming to a close now. And you know, it kept going with a few online film festivals, but you know, the reason we enter films into festivals is because we want to share it with audiences.
Yeah.
We want audiences to enjoy it. And at the Something Wicked Film Festival, we won the Audience Award, didn't we, for Best Fan Film? And that was just the biggest honour because, like I said, we share it at festivals for the audiences, for them to enjoy, and knowing that they did enjoy it. I mean, there's the proof that they did enjoy it, and that is just the greatest thing. So it means so much to be sharing the film with a physical audience one last time at a festival that, you know, we have already kind of been part of and love. And yeah, you know, it's just such a joy to be bringing it to people again. So I really hope people enjoy it, and if they want to see it again, it's on YouTube, it's on Vimeo, and you know, keep going with those views because it's doing really well on YouTube. It's got over 35,000 views already, and I'd like to keep that number going so people can find it there. And also, big thank you to Something Wicked Film Festival because you guys also showed Songbird, another one of my films. I think it was 2 years ago. So it's you know, I'm really happy to keep supporting you and keep coming back.
Well, that's funny. It's been 2 years. Oh man, this is what happens when I watch too many films. I'm actually a judge for another film festival, so I watch about 580 films a year. It's kind of crazy. It is kind of crazy. So I didn't recognize it from 2 years ago. That's okay.
Yeah, Songbird. Yes, you showed Songbird. That was a film about a young singer who has her voice stolen by a witch, and it's a fantasy. And she has to go and get it back, and goes through a magical forest to get her voice back from this jealous witch, which was a joy.
Well, that seems to me you like these fantasy and aspects, which I actually really enjoy because we don't actually get that many fantasy film submissions. I kind of worry sometimes. I kind of worry sometimes that some of the filmmakers out there don't do fantasy because they think they have to do something high fantasy all the time. So it's always good for me to be able to see lots of fantasy films being made. Like I said, one of the things about doing these films, the fan films, is most of these were fantasy films. So most of the submissions are fantasy films, and we've got a huge selection of horror fan films as usual. I was expecting that. Yeah. But I was a little surprised I didn't see that many sci-fi. So it's fantasy and the horror.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's usually the opposite for me. Like I mean, there's no fantasy film festivals out there. There aren't any. There's straight fantasy. There's sci-fi festivals, and there's sci-fi festivals that will accept fantasy, but because they're sci-fi films, they don't sci-fi festivals. They don't really like full-on fantasy. It's not. It's a hard genre. I was told very early on in my career, they said, what kind of films do you love? I was like, oh, I was raised on 80s fantasy films. I love Lord of the Rings. I want to make fantasy. And they were like, no, can you learn to do EastEnders instead? Because you'll get more work. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And it was very much squashed for about a decade. It was only with Game of Thrones coming out that fantasy became popular again, and now there's loads of things. There's Wheel of Time just started on Amazon Prime. There's Lord of the Rings series coming next year. We've just had Dark Crystal. So fantasy is very much having a comeback now. It's actually a really good time to be a fantasy filmmaker, and it's actually a bankable thing again. It's a bankable career that you can make money doing. So people kind of need to get over that. It was very much a mocked genre for a long time. It was not taken seriously. I take it mega seriously because I love Guillermo del Toro, who does not dampen down. He tells hard fantasy stories with proper monsters and proper world building, but they're not immature. They're artistic and they're gritty and they're, it's just beautifully made. And so I think he's helping change the game as well. I think there is the idea that all fantasies are fairy tales.
Yeah.
Or high fantasy is a frivolous thing, and it's not relatable. And that's again why Lord of the Rings is so great, because it is relatable. It's a war film that was written by a man who'd seen war firsthand, and experience the camaraderie that came with that, and that's why it's a beautiful piece of work, and that's why it's so relatable. There's a lot of fantasy I don't like, and I'm a massive nerd about the genre. There's a lot of high fantasy that is just fantasy for the sake of fantasy, and it's fairies and it's not saying something. When you have fantasy that has a message and that can then be related to the human experience, it's a very powerful thing, and it can help you understand the human emotion, the human experience better. That's why a lot of superhero films work nowadays, because they have human failings and they have difficulties which you didn't get back in the day when it was all Adam West and tights and silly good fun. You didn't really get it. Now you do. So people take it more seriously now, but it is hard to make good fantasy films when you're an independent filmmaker, because you need budget to do it right. If you overstretch, the cracks will show, the CGI will let you down. So you need to be clever. Don't try high fantasy straight away. Go for magical realism, go for fantasy touches. Maybe that's kind of what we try and do. But yeah, there's nothing. I've seen some independent fantasy films that have stretched way too far, and some of mine have. You know, it's so easily done.
Those are very good words to tell all of our young viewers out there who are trying to think about doing a fan film and or a fantasy film in general, keeping it as real as possible and within their means. So, but we don't see the cracks. Well, Sophie, it's been a pleasure talking with you and about you and your film, and we wish you nothing but the best for the continuing film festival run for this one and the one that you're about to be released. And I'm looking forward to whatever film you come up with next.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. And I hope audiences enjoy seeing the film.
Well, they did the first time around. We're going to do it again for a new audience. All right.
Thank you.